The Cincinnati summer heat hung heavy in the air as Pete Rose walked through the parking lot of Great American Ball Park. It was August 15th, 2019, and the 78-year-old baseball legend moved with the deliberate pace of a man who had carried the weight of both triumph and controversy for decades. His weathered hands, the same ones that had delivered 4,256 hits throughout his career, now trembled slightly as he reached for his car keys. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a few stragglers from the evening's game against the St. Louis Cardinals. Pete had been signing autographs at a memorabilia show inside the stadium's convention center, a routine that had become his livelihood since baseball's permanent ban had ended his official connection to the sport he loved more than life itself. "Mr. Rose! Mr. Rose!" The voice cut through the humid evening air like a crack of the bat. Pete turned to see a small figure running toward him across the asphalt. It was a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing a faded Cincinnati Reds jersey with Rose's iconic number 14. Behind him, a woman in her 30s hurried to catch up, her face flushed with embarrassment and concern. "Tommy, slow down," she called out. But the boy had already reached Pete, his eyes wide with excitement and hope. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rose," the woman said breathlessly as she caught up. "Tommy saw you walking and just took off. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is my son, Tommy. He's your biggest fan." Pete looked down at the boy, whose bright blue eyes sparkled with an innocence that reminded him of his own childhood in Cincinnati's West End. Tommy clutched a worn baseball in his small hands, the leather scuffed and discolored from countless games of catch in the backyard. "Well, hello there, Tommy," Pete said, his voice softening in a way that surprised even himself. "That's a nice jersey you got there, son." "My dad gave it to me," Tommy said proudly, then his voice dropped to a whisper. "He said you were the greatest hitter who ever lived. He said you played the game the right way, no matter what anybody else says." The words hit Pete harder than any fastball ever had. He knelt down to the boy's level, feeling the heat from the asphalt seep through his knees. Up close, he could see that Tommy's face was pale beneath his excitement, and there were dark circles under his eyes that seemed too mature for such a young face. "Your dad sounds like a smart man," Pete said. "What's that you got there?" "It's my lucky baseball," Tommy said, holding it out with reverence. "I was hoping, would you maybe sign it for me? I know you probably get asked that a lot, but this one's special." Pete took the ball in his hands, feeling its familiar weight. He'd held thousands of baseballs in his life, but something about this one felt different. The leather was soft and worn smooth, and he could see the faint impressions where small fingers had gripped it countless times. "Tell me about this ball, Tommy," Pete said. "What makes it so special?" Tommy's eyes lit up, and the words came tumbling out in a rush. "My dad and I play catch with it every day in our backyard. Well, we used to. He's been real sick lately, so he can't throw as much. But when he was feeling good, he'd tell me stories about watching you play at Riverfront Stadium. He said you never gave up, never stopped trying, even when things got tough." Sarah placed her hand on her son's shoulder, and Pete caught the pained look that crossed her face. He understood without words being spoken, the kind of understanding that comes from a lifetime of watching families in hospital waiting rooms and knowing that some battles can't be won with hustle and determination alone. "Your dad's right about never giving up," Pete said quietly. "That's the most important lesson baseball can teach you." He pulled out his pen, a silver Mont Blanc that had been a gift from his daughter years ago. "What's your dad's name?" "Michael," Tommy said. "Michael Mitchell." Pete thought for a moment, then began writing on the sweet spot of the ball. His handwriting, once bold and confident, now showed the slight tremor of age, but each letter was formed with deliberate care. "To Tommy and Michael Mitchell," he wrote, "keep swinging for the fences. Charlie Hustle, Pete Rose." He handed the ball back to Tommy, whose face transformed with pure joy. The boy cradled the signed baseball like it was made of the finest crystal. "Thank you, Mr. Rose," Tommy exclaimed. "Wait till Dad sees this. He's gonna be so excited." "You tell your dad that Pete Rose says he raised a good son," Pete said, standing up slowly. His knees protested the movement, but he ignored the discomfort. "And you remember what I wrote on that ball, okay? No matter what happens, you keep swinging." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes glistening with tears. "Mr. Rose, I can't thank you enough. Tommy talks about baseball constantly, and you've been his hero for so long. This means everything to him." Pete looked at the woman, seeing the exhaustion etched in the lines around her eyes, the weight of responsibility that comes with caring for a sick spouse and trying to maintain normalcy for a child. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror during his own dark times. "He's a good kid," Pete said simply. "You're doing right by him." As they prepared to leave, Tommy suddenly reached out and took Pete's hand. His small fingers wrapped around Pete's weathered ones, and for a moment, 3 generations of baseball love connected in that parking lot under the dim orange glow of the streetlights. "Thank you for being my hero," Tommy whispered. Pete squeezed the boy's hand gently, feeling the trust and admiration flowing between them. "Thank you for reminding me why I fell in love with this game in the first place," he whispered back. They stood there for several long seconds, the sounds of the city fading into the background. Cars passed on the nearby street, their headlights casting moving shadows across the parking lot. But in that moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the 3 of them, and the weight of the signed baseball Tommy clutched against his chest. Finally, Sarah gently tugged Tommy toward their car, a modest sedan parked under one of the few working streetlights. "Come on, sweetheart. We need to get home to Dad." Pete watched them walk away, Tommy skipping beside his mother, the signed baseball never leaving his grip. As they reached their car, Tommy turned back one last time and waved enthusiastically. Pete raised his own hand in response, a smile creasing his weathered features. The engine of their sedan coughed to life, and Pete remained standing in the parking lot until their taillights disappeared around the corner. Only then did he continue to his own car, a black Mercedes that seemed out of place in the working-class neighborhood surrounding the ballpark. As he drove home through the familiar streets of Cincinnati, Pete couldn't shake the image of Tommy's bright eyes and the feel of that small hand in his. He'd signed thousands of autographs over the years, posed for countless pictures, and met fans from all walks of life. But something about this encounter felt different, more significant somehow. He thought about Michael Mitchell lying sick at home, waiting for his son to return with a story that would probably be told and retold for years to come. Pete understood the power of those stories, how they could sustain a person through the darkest times. His own father had filled his childhood with tales of baseball legends, painting pictures of heroes who embodied everything good about America's pastime. The irony wasn't lost on him that he, banned from baseball for betting on games, had become a hero to a young boy whose father was fighting a battle that couldn't be won with determination alone. Life had a way of complicating the simple narratives we tell ourselves, Pete mused as he pulled into his driveway. That night, as he sat in his study surrounded by memorabilia from his playing days, Pete found himself thinking about legacy. Not the records he'd set or the championships he'd won, but the moment when a sick man's son had looked up at him with pure admiration and called him a hero. He pulled out his phone and did something he rarely did anymore. He looked up the Mitchell family online. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. Michael Mitchell, 42, a construction foreman from Cincinnati's East Side, had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 6 months ago. The family had set up a GoFundMe page to help with medical expenses and to create memories for Tommy while his father was still able. Pete stared at the computer screen for a long time, reading about Michael's career, his marriage to Sarah, and his dreams for his son's future. There were pictures of Tommy at baseball games, always wearing his number 14 jersey, always with that same bright smile Pete had seen in the parking lot. As the clock struck midnight, Pete made a decision that would change the course of 3 lives forever. He reached for his phone and began making calls, using connections he'd maintained despite his exile from organized baseball. By morning, plans were in motion for something that would give the Mitchell family memories to last a lifetime, and give Pete Rose a chance at the kind of redemption that can't be found in record books or Hall of Fame plaques. 3 days after the parking lot encounter, Sarah Mitchell was washing dishes in her modest kitchen when the phone rang. She almost didn't answer it. Creditors and medical billing companies had been calling constantly since Michael's diagnosis, and she'd grown weary of explaining their financial situation to strangers who spoke in cold, clinical terms about payment plans and collections. But something made her dry her hands on the faded dish towel and pick up the receiver. "Hello? Mrs. Mitchell? This is Pete Rose." Sarah nearly dropped the phone. She looked around the kitchen as if expecting to find someone playing a practical joke on her, but she was alone. Tommy was at school and Michael was sleeping in their bedroom, the pain medication having finally given him a few hours of peace. "I'm sorry. Who did you say this was?" "Pete Rose. I met you and Tommy in the parking lot the other night. He had me sign his baseball." Sarah's legs suddenly felt weak, and she sank into one of the mismatched chairs around their small dining table. "Mr. Rose, how did you get our number?" "That's not important right now," Pete said, his voice gentle but determined. "What's important is Tommy and your husband. I'd like to help." "Help? I don't understand." Pete took a deep breath on the other end of the line. He'd rehearsed this conversation in his mind dozens of times over the past 3 days, but now that the moment was here, the words felt inadequate. "Mrs. Mitchell, Sarah, I know about Michael's condition. I know things are tough for your family right now. I'd like to do something for Tommy and for your husband. Something that might make this time a little easier." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Mr. Rose, I don't know what to say. Tommy hasn't stopped talking about meeting you. He's been sleeping with that baseball you signed. He's a special kid," Pete said. "Reminds me a lot of myself when I was his age. Full of love for the game and life itself. Kids like that, they deserve to see their dreams come true." "What are you talking about?" Pete smiled, even though Sarah couldn't see it. "How would Tommy like to spend a day at Great American Ballpark, not as a fan in the stands but on the field? I've talked to some people, pulled a few strings. The Reds have a workout scheduled for tomorrow, and they've agreed to let Tommy come out and meet the players, maybe even take some batting practice." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "You're serious. Dead serious. And I'd like Michael to be there too, if he's feeling up to it. I know it might be difficult for him, but I thought maybe it would mean something to both of them." The kitchen fell silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Sarah trying to process what she was hearing. She thought about Tommy, who'd been struggling in school lately as he worried about his father. She thought about Michael, who spent most days now too weak to get out of bed, but who still managed to smile when Tommy told him about his baseball dreams. "Mrs. Mitchell, you still there?" "Yes," she whispered. "I'm here. Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us." Pete was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer that question. How could he explain that a little boy's hero worship had reminded him of who he used to be before the gambling allegations and the lifetime ban? How could he tell her that Tommy's innocence had made him want to be worthy of that admiration? "Let's just say Tommy reminded me why I started playing baseball in the first place," Pete said finally. "It wasn't for the money or the fame. It was for the pure love of the game. When I saw that light in his eyes, I remembered what that felt like." Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks. He would be over the moon. But Michael, he's been having more bad days than good ones lately. I'm not sure he'd be strong enough. We'll make sure he's comfortable. The Reds have a luxury suite with air conditioning and comfortable seating. He can watch from there if being on the field is too much. And if he's not feeling up to it at all, we'll understand. But I thought maybe it would give him a chance to see his son's face light up. When? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. I'll have a car come pick you up. Make sure you don't have to worry about driving or parking or any of that. Sarah looked around her humble kitchen, at the stack of medical bills on the counter, at the calendar marked with doctor's appointments and therapy sessions. For months, her world had shrunk to the size of hospital rooms and insurance forms. The idea of stepping outside that reality, even for a day, seemed almost too good to believe. Mr. Rose? Yeah? Thank you. Whatever your reasons, whatever this costs you, thank you. After hanging up the phone, Sarah sat in the quiet kitchen for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Then she heard movement from the bedroom and quickly went to check on Michael. She found him sitting up in bed, looking more alert than he had in days. His face was still gaunt from the cancer treatment, and his once thick hair had grown back in patches, but there was something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in weeks. "Who was on the phone?" he asked. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand. "You're not going to believe this." As she recounted the conversation with Pete Rose, she watched Michael's expression change from confusion to disbelief to something approaching wonder. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "He wants to take Tommy onto the field at Great American. And you too, if you're feeling up to it." Michael leaned back against his pillows, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You know, when I was Tommy's age, my dad took me to see Pete Rose play at Riverfront Stadium. It was 1978, the year he got his 3,000th hit. I'll never forget watching him run to first base on a routine ground ball, running like his life depended on it. That's when I fell in love with baseball. I remember you telling me that story," Sarah said softly. "I always dreamed of taking Tommy to meet him someday. I had this fantasy that maybe we'd run into Pete at a restaurant or something, and I'd be able to tell him how much he meant to me as a kid. I never imagined." His voice trailed off. "You want to try to go?" Michael squeezed her hand. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away. If Pete Rose wants to make my son's dream come true, I'll find the strength to be there." That evening, when Tommy came home from school, they sat him down in the living room for a family meeting. Sarah and Michael had decided to tell him together, wanting to see his reaction as a family. "Tommy," Sarah began, "do you remember the other night when you met Pete Rose?" Tommy's eyes immediately brightened, and he ran to his room to retrieve the signed baseball, which had barely left his side since that evening. "You mean this? I showed everyone at school. Mrs. Patterson said it was the coolest thing she'd ever seen." "Well," Michael said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks, "Pete Rose called today. He has a surprise for you." Tommy clutched the baseball tighter. "A surprise? What kind of surprise?" Sarah and Michael exchanged glances, both fighting back tears as they prepared to deliver news that would make their son the happiest boy in Cincinnati. "How would you like to spend the day at Great American Ballpark tomorrow?" Michael said. "Not in the stands, but on the field, meeting the players and maybe even taking some swings in the batting cage." Tommy's mouth fell open, and for a moment he seemed frozen in disbelief. Then the baseball slipped from his hands and rolled across the carpet as he launched himself into his parents' arms. "Really? Really, really? I get to go on the field where Pete Rose played?" "Really, really," Sarah laughed, holding him tight. "And Daddy's going to come too." Tommy pulled back to look at his father with concern. "Are you feeling good enough, Dad? I don't want you to get sick because of me." Michael pulled his son closer, feeling stronger in that moment than he had in months. "Son, I wouldn't miss this for the world. You and me and Pete Rose, it's going to be a day we'll remember forever." That night, Tommy was too excited to eat dinner. He tried on his Pete Rose jersey 3 times, practiced his swing in the backyard until it got dark, and fell asleep with the signed baseball clutched against his chest. In their own bedroom, Michael and Sarah lay awake talking quietly about the incredible turn their lives had taken. "What do you think changed his mind?" Sarah asked. "I mean, why is Pete Rose going out of his way for us?" Michael considered the question. "I don't know. Maybe he sees something in Tommy that reminds him of himself. Or maybe he just needed to be reminded that despite everything that's happened to him, he's still a hero to kids like Tommy." "I've been reading about him online," Sarah admitted. "The gambling thing, the lifetime ban. It's been rough for him." "Yeah, but you know what? None of that matters to Tommy. To him, Pete Rose is just the guy who got 4,256 hits and played every game like it was the World Series. Maybe Pete needs to be reminded that there are still people who see him that way." As they drifted off to sleep, neither of them could have imagined that the next day would not only fulfill their son's wildest dreams, but would also set in motion events that would touch the hearts of an entire city and remind everyone involved why baseball is called America's pastime. In his own home across town, Pete Rose was also lying awake, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the day ahead. He'd made dozens of phone calls, called in favors from people who still respected him despite his banishment from the game. Tomorrow would be about more than giving a sick man and his son a special day. It would be about remembering what really mattered in life. He thought about the weight of Tommy's small hand in his, the trust and admiration in those bright blue eyes. For the first time in years, Pete Rose felt like he might actually deserve to be someone's hero. The black sedan arrived at the Mitchell house at exactly 1:15 p.m., 45 minutes before they were due at Great American Ballpark. Tommy had been dressed and ready since 10 a.m., his Pete Rose jersey spotless and his hair combed so carefully that every strand was in place. He sat by the living room window, the signed baseball in his lap, watching for any sign of their ride. Michael had struggled that morning. The excitement of the day ahead battled with his body's increasing weakness, and there had been a moment after breakfast when Sarah wondered if they should cancel. But then he'd seen Tommy's face, radiant with anticipation, and he'd found reserves of strength he didn't know he still possessed. "Dad, I think they're here!" Tommy called out, his voice nearly cracking with excitement. Sarah helped Michael to his feet, steadying him as he adjusted the Cincinnati Reds cap he'd worn to every game they'd attended together. It was faded and worn, the C logo barely visible after years of sweat and sunshine, but it was his lucky hat, and today felt like a day when luck mattered more than ever. The driver was a kind man in his 50s who introduced himself as Frank. "Mr. Rose asked me to take extra special care of you folks today," he said with a warm smile. "He's waiting for us at the ballpark, and I've got to tell you, I've never seen him this excited about anything in years." The drive to the stadium was magical for Tommy. He pressed his face against the window, watching the familiar sights of Cincinnati pass by, but everything looked different somehow. The buildings seemed taller, the sky seemed bluer, and the city felt alive with possibility. "Tell me again what Pete Rose said about meeting the players," Tommy asked his mother for perhaps the 10th time that day. "He said some of the Reds would be there for a light workout, and that you might get to meet them and maybe take some practice swings," Sarah replied, smoothing down a cowlick in his hair that refused to stay in place. Michael reached over and squeezed his son's hand. "You know, Tommy, I want you to remember every detail of today. Not just the baseball stuff, but everything. The way the grass smells, the sound of the ball hitting the bat, the feeling of standing where your heroes stood. These are the memories that'll stay with you forever." When they pulled into the players' parking area at Great American Ballpark, Tommy's eyes grew wide. He'd been to games before, but always as regular fans, parking in the general lots and entering through the main gates. This felt like being welcomed into a secret world that he'd only dreamed about. Pete Rose was waiting for them at the players' entrance, wearing khakis and a red polo shirt that made him look more like somebody's grandfather than a baseball legend. But when he smiled and walked toward their car, Tommy saw the same confident stride that had carried Pete around the bases 4,256 times. "There's my favorite baseball player," Pete called out as Tommy practically bounced out of the sedan. "Mr. Rose, I can't believe we're really here." Pete knelt down to Tommy's level, just as he had in the parking lot 3 nights earlier. "Well, believe it, son. This is your day. How are you feeling, champ?" "I'm so excited I think I might throw up," Tommy said honestly, which made everyone laugh. Pete stood and shook hands with Michael, noting how the man's grip was still firm despite his obvious illness. "Michael, thanks for making the trip. I know it wasn't easy." "Are you kidding? I wouldn't miss this for anything," Michael replied. "This is the nicest thing anyone's ever done for our family." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes already misty with tears. "Mr. Rose, I still can't believe you're doing this. Please call me Pete, and believe me, this is as much for me as it is for Tommy. I haven't been this excited to be at a ballpark in years." Pete led them through a maze of corridors that Tommy had never imagined existed. They passed the visitors' clubhouse, the media interview room, and the training facilities, with Pete keeping up a steady stream of stories about his playing days. "This tunnel here," Pete said as they walked down a concrete corridor toward the field. "This is where we used to run out for home games. I must have run through here 1,000 times, but I never got tired of that moment when you first see the field and hear the crowd." Tommy was practically vibrating with excitement. "Is it true you used to slide headfirst into bases?" "Every chance I got," Pete laughed. "Drove my managers crazy, but that was how I played. All out, all the time. Your dad ever teach you how to slide?" "A little bit, in the backyard. But Mom doesn't like it because I get my clothes dirty." "Well, today you might get to practice on real bases. What do you think about that?" Before Tommy could answer, they emerged from the tunnel and stepped onto the field at Great American Ballpark. The afternoon sun was bright overhead, casting sharp shadows across the perfectly manicured grass. The stadium was empty, except for a handful of grounds crew members and what appeared to be several players stretching near the batting cages behind home plate. Tommy stopped dead in his tracks, his mouth hanging open. He'd seen this view on television countless times, but being here, standing on the same grass where his heroes played, was overwhelming. "This is where the Reds play," he whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell. "This is where you're going to play today," Pete corrected him. "Come on, let me introduce you to some friends of mine." As they walked across the infield, Michael felt his breath catch in his throat. The cancer had been robbing him of many things: energy, appetite, hope for the future. But in this moment, watching his son experience pure joy, he felt more alive than he had in months. The first person to greet them was Joey Votto, the Reds' all-star first baseman, who was stretching near the batting cage. Pete had called in several favors to arrange this day, and Votto had immediately volunteered to be part of it. "You must be Tommy," Votto said with a genuine smile, extending his hand for a shake. "Pete's been telling everyone about you. Says you've got a pretty sweet swing." Tommy's voice came out as a squeak. "You're Joey Votto, guilty as charged. And you're the young man who's going to show me how it's done in the batting cage, right?" Tommy looked back at his parents as if to confirm this was really happening, then nodded enthusiastically. Over the next hour, Tommy lived what felt like a dream sequence. He met pitcher Sonny Gray, who taught him the proper grip for a curveball. Third baseman Eugenio Suarez showed him how to position himself in the batter's box for maximum power. And through it all, Pete Rose was there, offering encouragement and sharing stories that made the professional players laugh and nod with respect. The highlight came when they set Tommy up in the batting cage with a tee and a bucket of practice balls. Pete stood behind him, adjusting his stance and grip, while Votto pitched soft tosses from the side. "Remember what I told you about never giving up," Pete said quietly in Tommy's ear. "Every swing is a new opportunity. Don't worry about the last one, just focus on this one." Tommy's first few swings were wild, the bat whistling through empty air as nerves got the better of him. But gradually, with Pete's patient coaching and the encouraging words of the major leaguers around him, he began to make contact. The sound of the aluminum bat connecting with the ball echoed through the empty stadium, and Tommy's face lit up with pure joy. He'd hit balls before in his backyard and at the local park, but this was different. This was real. "There you go," Pete shouted. "That's what I'm talking about. You just hit a ball in a major league ballpark." Michael watched from his wheelchair. The stadium staff had provided one to help him conserve his energy, with tears streaming down his face. Sarah stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, both of them witnessing their son's joy and knowing they would carry this memory forever. After 20 minutes in the batting cage, Votto had an idea. "You know what, Tommy? I think you're ready for the real thing. What do you say we head out to the pitcher's mound and I'll throw you a few easy ones?" Tommy's eyes went wide. On the real field? Like on the actual pitcher's mound where the Reds play? The very same one. What followed was 15 minutes of pure magic. Tommy stood at home plate at Great American Ballpark, wearing his Pete Rose jersey, with Joey Votto throwing underhand pitches from 45 feet away. Most of his swings resulted in foul balls or grounders, but twice he made solid contact, sending line drives into the gap between first and second base. Pete stood behind the backstop, calling out encouragement. "Way to keep your eye on the ball, Tommy. That's big league contact right there." The other players had gathered to watch, and they cheered every swing like it was Game 7 of the World Series. For those precious minutes, Tommy Mitchell wasn't just a 9-year-old boy from Cincinnati's East Side. He was a ball player, living his dream on the same stage where legends were made. As the session wound down, Pete called Tommy over to the dugout. "I've got one more surprise for you, champ." He handed Tommy a brand new Louisville Slugger bat, the same model Pete had used during his playing days. Tommy's name was burned into the barrel in elegant script letters, along with Great American Ballpark and the date. "This is yours to keep," Pete said. "Something to remember today by." Tommy ran his small hands over the smooth ashwood, feeling the perfect balance of the bat. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Every time you swing that bat, I want you to remember what you learned today. Play hard, play fair, and never give up. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Pete, I promise." As they prepared to leave the field, Tommy ran over to his father, who was still sitting in the wheelchair but looked more energetic than he had in weeks. "Dad, did you see me hit those balls?" "I saw everything, son. I'm so proud of you I could burst." Tommy hugged his father tightly, and Michael closed his eyes, trying to memorize the feeling of his son's arms around him, the smell of grass and sunshine, and the sound of his boy's laughter echoing through an empty stadium. Pete Rose watched the family embrace and felt something shift inside his chest. For years, he'd been carrying the weight of his mistakes, the shame of his ban from baseball, and the knowledge that his legacy would always be complicated by his gambling addiction. But in this moment, watching a father and son share joy on a baseball diamond, he remembered why he'd fallen in love with the game in the first place. As they walked back toward the tunnel that would take them out of the stadium, Tommy tugged on Pete's shirt. "Mr. Pete?" "Yeah, buddy?" "Thank you for the best day of my whole life." Pete knelt down one more time, looking into those bright blue eyes that had reminded him what heroism really meant. "Thank you for reminding me why I love baseball, Tommy. You keep playing, you hear me? Don't let anybody tell you you're not good enough." "I won't, I promise." Pete stood and shook hands with Michael one more time. "You've got a special boy there." "I know." Michael replied. "And today, thanks to you, he'll always know he's special too." As the sedan pulled away from Great American Ballpark, Tommy pressed his face against the rear window, watching the stadium grow smaller in the distance. In his arms, he clutched the personalized bat and the signed baseball, but more importantly, he carried memories that would last a lifetime. None of them knew it yet, but their story was about to reach far beyond the confines of one family and one former ball player. Within days, word would spread about Pete Rose's act of kindness, and the ripple effects would touch lives across the country in ways none of them could have imagined. But that was still to come. For now, there was just a little boy who had played baseball in a major league stadium, a sick father who had watched his son's dreams come true, and a controversial sports legend who had been reminded that sometimes the most important hits don't show up in any record book. 2 days after Tommy's magical afternoon at Great American Ballpark, Sarah Mitchell was surprised to receive a phone call from a reporter at the Cincinnati Enquirer. She almost hung up, thinking it was another creditor or medical billing company, but something in the woman's voice made her pause. "Mrs. Mitchell, my name is Jennifer Walsh, and I'm a sports reporter with the Enquirer. I received a tip about something special that happened at the ballpark recently involving your family and Pete Rose. Would you be willing to share your story?" Sarah was immediately protective. "How did you find out about that? We haven't told anyone outside our immediate family. Someone at the stadium mentioned it to our baseball beat writer. Look, Mrs. Mitchell, I understand your hesitation, but this sounds like exactly the kind of positive story people need to hear right now. Would you at least be willing to talk to me off the record first?" That evening, after Tommy had gone to bed clutching his personalized bat, Sarah and Michael sat at their kitchen table discussing whether to share their story with the newspaper. They'd always been private people, uncomfortable with attention, but something about the reporter's approach felt genuine. "What do you think Pete would want?" Sarah asked. Michael considered the question carefully. "I think he'd want people to know that despite all his troubles, he's still the man who cares about kids and baseball. Maybe this story could help people remember the good things about him." The next morning, Sarah called Jennifer Walsh back and agreed to an interview. What she didn't expect was how therapeutic it would be to share their experience with someone who genuinely cared about the human side of the story. "Tell me about Tommy's reaction when he first met Pete Rose," Jennifer prompted, her notebook ready. Sarah smiled, remembering that night in the parking lot. It was like watching pure joy happen in real time. Tommy had been so worried about his father, so serious for such a young boy, but when Pete knelt down and talked to him like he was the most important person in the world, I saw my little boy's face light up in a way it hadn't in months. The interview lasted nearly 2 hours, with Sarah and Michael sharing not just the details of their day at the ballpark, but the context of their struggle with Michael's illness and the financial strain it had placed on their family. Jennifer was moved to tears several times, particularly when Michael described watching his son hit baseballs on the same field where his own childhood hero had played. "The thing people don't understand about Pete Rose," Michael said, his voice growing stronger as he spoke, "is that he never forgot what it was like to be a kid who loved baseball. When he was with Tommy, he wasn't thinking about his reputation or his troubles. He was just a man who wanted to make a little boy happy." Jennifer's story ran on the front page of the sports section 3 days later, under the headline, "Pete Rose's Greatest Hit, A Day of Dreams for a Young Fan." The article was beautifully written, capturing both the joy of Tommy's experience and the poignancy of a family dealing with terminal illness. But what happened next surprised everyone involved. Within hours of the story being published online, it began to spread across social media. Baseball fans from around the country shared the article, adding their own comments about Pete Rose's character and the power of sports to bring hope during difficult times. By the end of the day, Shaka Pete Rose's greatest hit was trending on Twitter. The story caught the attention of ESPN's Sports Center, which featured it as their feel-good story of the day. The segment included an interview with Jennifer Walsh and showed file footage of Pete Rose from his playing days, followed by a recent photo of him with Tommy at Great American Ballpark. "This is what sports are really about," the ESPN anchor concluded. "Not the controversies or the statistics, but the ability to create moments of pure joy and remind us of our shared humanity." Pete Rose first learned about the media attention when his daughter called him that evening. "Dad, have you seen the news? There's a story about you and some little boy, and it's everywhere." Pete was genuinely surprised. He'd arranged Tommy's day at the ballpark because it felt like the right thing to do, not because he wanted publicity. In fact, he'd specifically asked the Reds organization to keep the event quiet, not wanting it to seem like a publicity stunt. "I didn't know they were going to write about it," he told his daughter. "The family must have talked to a reporter." "Dad, you need to read this article." And the comments. People are saying the most incredible things about you. That night, Pete sat in his study reading the Cincinnati Enquirer story online, then scrolling through hundreds of comments from strangers who had been moved by the account of his kindness to the Mitchell family. Many shared their own stories of meeting Pete during his playing days, describing him as gracious and kind to young fans. But it was one comment in particular that stopped him cold. "My father took me to meet Pete Rose at a baseball card show in 1985. I was 8 years old and terrified, but Pete spent 10 minutes talking to me about my little league team. He signed a ball for me and told me to never stop playing. I'm 44 now, and I coach youth baseball because of that conversation. Pete Rose changed my life that day, just like he changed Tommy Mitchell's life." Sometimes the most important statistics aren't the ones in the record books. Pete read the comment 3 times, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years. Pride that wasn't complicated by shame or regret. For the first time since his gambling troubles began, people were talking about him for the right reasons. The next morning brought more unexpected developments. Pete received a call from Good Morning America asking if he and the Mitchell family would appear on the show together. CNN wanted to do a feature on the story for their sports segment. Local radio stations were calling for interviews, but the call that surprised him most came from Major League Baseball's headquarters in New York. "Mr. Rose, this is Patricia Williams from the Commissioner's office. Commissioner Manfred would like to speak with you about the story that's been in the news." Pete's heart rate immediately jumped. His lifetime ban from baseball was always in the back of his mind, a constant reminder of his fall from grace. Any contact from MLB headquarters made him nervous. "Is this about the ballpark access? Because I made sure to go through proper channels for everything we did with the Mitchell family." "No, sir. This isn't about any violation. The commissioner has been following the story about your kindness to the young boy and his family. He'd like to have a conversation with you about it." 2 hours later, Pete found himself on a conference call with Rob Manfred, the commissioner of Major League Baseball. It was the first time they'd spoken directly since Manfred had upheld Pete's lifetime ban several years earlier. "Pete, I've been reading about what you did for the Mitchell family," Manfred began. "It's exactly the kind of story that reminds people why baseball matters. I didn't do it for publicity, Commissioner. I just wanted to help a good kid and his father. I believe that. And that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. Look, Pete, your situation with the ban is complicated, and that hasn't changed. But what you did for that family, that's the Pete Rose that a lot of people remember and love. That's the man who played the game the right way for 24 years. Pete wasn't sure where the conversation was heading, but he remained cautious. "I appreciate you saying that. I'm not making any promises about your reinstatement," Manfred continued. "But I want you to know that gestures like this don't go unnoticed. The game needs more people who understand what you showed that little boy, that baseball is about more than wins and losses. It's about hope and dreams and bringing out the best in people. After the call ended, Pete sat in his study feeling more conflicted than ever. For years, he'd focused on his ban from baseball, on what he'd lost and what he might never get back. But the events of the past week had reminded him that his legacy wasn't just about his playing career or his mistakes. It was also about moments like the one he'd shared with Tommy Mitchell. Meanwhile, at the Mitchell house, the family was trying to process their sudden fame. Tommy couldn't understand why reporters wanted to talk to him about playing baseball with Pete Rose. To him, it had just been the best day of his life. But he loved showing people his personalized bat and telling the story of hitting balls at Great American Ballpark. Michael was having a different reaction to the attention. His cancer had progressed in the past few days, and he was spending more time in bed. But the outpouring of support from strangers around the country was overwhelming in the best possible way. "Look at this," Sarah said, reading emails that had been pouring in since the story broke. "This one's from a woman in Seattle whose son also has cancer. She says reading about Tommy's day gave her hope. And this one's from a man in Florida who wants to send Tommy a baseball card collection." The most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Joey Votto, the Reds' first baseman who had pitched to Tommy during his day at the ballpark, had written a personal letter to the family. "Dear Michael, Sarah, and Tommy, I wanted you to know that meeting Tommy was one of the highlights of my season. His joy and enthusiasm reminded all of us why we fell in love with baseball in the first place. But more than that, watching you as a family showed me what real courage looks like. Michael, your strength in the face of your illness and your determination to be there for your son's special day was inspiring to everyone who met you. Tommy, your love for the game and your respect for everyone you met that day showed maturity beyond your years. I've enclosed some items for Tommy, a game-used bat from this season and a signed jersey. But more importantly, I want Tommy to know that he'll always have friends at Great American Ballpark. Whenever you want to come to a game, just let us know. You'll always have tickets waiting for you. Keep fighting, keep believing, and keep playing ball. Your friend, Joey Votto." That evening, as Michael read Votto's letter aloud to Tommy, Sarah noticed something she hadn't seen in weeks. Despite his obvious physical decline, there was a lightness in her husband's voice, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Michael said after Tommy had gone to bed. "It's not the attention or the letters or any of that. It's that Tommy got to see what happens when people choose to be kind to each other. Pete Rose didn't have to do what he did for us. He chose to, and now all these other people are choosing to reach out and support us. That's the lesson I want Tommy to remember." Sarah nodded, thinking about how much their lives had changed in just 1 week. They were still facing the same medical challenges, still struggling with the same financial pressures, but somehow everything felt different now. They were no longer alone in their fight. "Do you think we should try to thank Pete somehow?" she asked. Michael smiled. "I think we just did. By sharing our story, by letting people see the good thing he did for us, we gave him something he probably needed even more than we needed that day at the ballpark." "What's that?" "A chance to be remembered for the right reasons." As news of Pete Rose's kindness continued to spread across the country, none of them could have predicted the chain of events that would follow. The story had captured something the American public desperately needed, a reminder that heroes are made not just by their achievements, but by their ability to lift others up in moments of need. The final chapter of their story was yet to be written, but already it was clear that a simple act of kindness in a ballpark parking lot had created ripples that would extend far beyond Cincinnati, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways that no one could have imagined. 3 weeks after the story broke nationally, Pete Rose received a call that would change everything. He was in his kitchen making coffee when the phone rang, and he almost didn't answer it, having grown weary of the constant media requests since the Mitchell family story went viral. "Pete, this is Michael Mitchell." Pete immediately set down his coffee mug, surprised to hear from Tommy's father directly. "Michael, how are you doing? How's Tommy?" "Pete, I need to ask you for something, and I hope you'll understand why." The weakness in Michael's voice was immediately apparent, and Pete could tell that the cancer was progressing rapidly. He'd been following up on the family through mutual contacts at the Reds organization, so he knew that Michael's condition had worsened significantly. "Whatever you need, just ask. Tommy's having a really hard time with me being sick. He's trying to be brave, but he's just a little boy, you know? He keeps talking about that day at the ballpark, about the promises he made to you, about never giving up. I think he's trying to apply that to me, thinking that if he just believes hard enough, I'll get better." Pete's heart sank. He understood immediately the impossible position this put Tommy in, trying to reconcile his baseball hero's message of perseverance with the reality that some battles can't be won through determination alone. "What can I do to help? Would you come see him? Not for publicity or anything like that, just would you come talk to him? Help him understand that sometimes never giving up means different things than just fighting. Sometimes it means accepting what we can't change and finding peace with it." Pete didn't hesitate. "I'll be there this afternoon." When Pete arrived at the Mitchell house that evening, he was shocked by how much Michael's appearance had deteriorated in just 3 weeks. The man who had summoned the strength to attend his son's special day at the ballpark was now clearly in the final stages of his battle with cancer. Tommy greeted Pete at the door with the same enthusiasm as always, but there were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual boundless energy seemed forced. "Mr. Pete, Mom, Dad, Pete Rose is here." Pete spent the first hour simply visiting with the family, sharing stories about his own childhood and asking Tommy about school and his continued baseball practice. But eventually, Michael asked Sarah to take Tommy into the backyard so the two of them could talk privately. "I don't have much time left," Michael said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe days, maybe a couple of weeks. Tommy doesn't really understand what that means yet." Monday Pete leaned forward in his chair. "What do you need me to tell him?" "I need him to understand that keeping his promise to you about never giving up doesn't mean he has to keep believing I'm going to get better. I need him to know that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept reality and find ways to keep going anyway." They talked for another 20 minutes, with Michael sharing his fears about leaving Tommy without a father and his hopes for his son's future. When they finally called Tommy back inside, Pete was ready for one of the most important conversations of his life. "Tommy, your dad and I have been talking about what it means to never give up," Pete began, sitting on the couch with the boy beside him. "Do you remember what I wrote on your baseball? Keep swinging for the fences," Tommy recited immediately. "That's right. But I want to make sure you understand what that really means. It doesn't just mean keep trying to hit home runs in baseball. It means keep trying to live the best life you can, even when things get really hard." Tommy looked confused. "But you said never give up. That means Dad's going to get better, right? If we just believe hard enough." Pete glanced at Michael, who nodded encouragingly from his chair. "Tommy, your dad is the bravest man I've ever met. He's been fighting as hard as anyone could fight. But sometimes, even when we fight with everything we have, we can't win every battle. That doesn't mean we gave up. It just means some things are bigger than we are. So Dad's going to die?" Tommy's voice was small and scared. Pete put his arm around the boy's shoulders. "Your dad's very sick, Tommy. The doctors are doing everything they can, but yes, he might die from this sickness. And that's not because he gave up, and it's not because you didn't believe hard enough. It's just because sometimes bad things happen to good people. Tommy was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then he asked, "If Dad dies, does that mean I failed? Does that mean I broke my promise to you?" "Oh, buddy, no," Pete said, pulling Tommy closer. "Your promise to me was to never give up on living, never give up on being the best person you can be. If your dad dies, the way you honor him and keep your promise is by continuing to live a good life, by treating people with kindness, by playing baseball because you love it, and by growing up to be the kind of man he would be proud of." Michael watched this conversation with tears streaming down his face, grateful beyond words that Pete Rose was helping his son understand something he'd struggled to explain himself. "You mean I can keep my promise even if Dad doesn't get better?" Tommy asked. "Especially then," Pete said, "because that's when it's hardest to keep going, and that's when it matters most." They talked for another hour, with Pete sharing stories about his own father's death and how that had motivated him to pursue his baseball dreams even harder. He helped Tommy understand that love doesn't end when someone dies, and that the best way to honor his father would be to carry forward the lessons Michael had taught him. By the time Pete left that evening, Tommy seemed to have found a measure of peace with the situation. He hugged Pete goodbye and whispered, "Thank you for helping me understand how to keep my promise." Michael died 6 days later, peacefully at home with Sarah and Tommy by his side. His last words were about how proud he was of his son and how grateful he was that Pete Rose had shown Tommy what true heroism looked like. The funeral was held at St. Anthony's Catholic Church in Cincinnati's East End, and Pete Rose sat in the back row, quietly paying his respects to a man he'd known for less than a month, but who had profoundly impacted his life. When Tommy saw him there, the boy broke away from his mother and ran down the aisle to hug him. "Mr. Pete, you came." "Of course I came, buddy. I told you we'd always be friends." After the service, as people filed out to the cemetery, Pete approached Sarah to offer his condolences. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he said. "Michael was a special man." "He really was," Sarah replied. "And what you did for us, what you did for Tommy in these last few weeks. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. You gave me something too." "What's that?" Pete looked around at the crowd of mourners, many of whom he recognized as neighbors and friends who had rallied around the Mitchell family during Michael's illness. "You reminded me what community looks like. What it means to be there for each other when it matters." The story of Pete Rose's continued support for the Mitchell family during Michael's final days became another viral sensation, but this time the focus was different. Instead of just celebrating a feel-good moment, people began to have deeper conversations about what it means to be a hero, about redemption, and about the power of simple human kindness. ESPN produced a documentary called Charlie Hustle's Greatest Hit, which followed the relationship between Pete Rose and the Mitchell family from that first meeting in the parking lot through Michael's death and its aftermath. The documentary was nominated for a Sports Emmy and sparked a national conversation about Pete Rose's place in baseball history. More importantly, it led to the creation of the Charlie Hustle Foundation, a charity that Pete established to provide experiences like Tommy's for other children dealing with family illness or hardship. Within a year, the foundation had helped hundreds of kids meet their sports heroes and created memories that would last their lifetimes. Tommy continued to play baseball throughout his youth, always wearing number 14 in honor of Pete Rose. He kept the personalized bat in his bedroom, but only used it for special occasions, treating it like the precious artifact it had become. On the 5-year anniversary of his father's death, Tommy, now 14 years old and playing on his high school's varsity team, wrote a letter to Pete Rose. "Dear Mr. Pete, I wanted to write to tell you that I kept my promise. I never gave up, even when Dad died, and everything felt hopeless for a while. I'm playing varsity baseball as a freshman, and every time I step up to the plate, I remember what you taught me about never giving up and always playing the game the right way. More than that, though, I remember what you taught me about how to be a good person. You showed me that being a hero isn't about being perfect or never making mistakes. It's about being there for people when they need you most, even if you don't have to be. Mom and I are doing well. We still live in the same house, and she's going back to school to become a nurse. She says Dad would be proud of both of us for not giving up and for finding ways to help other people. I don't know if you remember, but you once told me that the most important statistics aren't the ones in the record books. I understand what you meant now. The most important numbers are how many people you help, how many smiles you create, and how many lives you touch. Thank you for touching ours. Your friend always, Tommy Mitchell PS. I still have that baseball you signed. It sits on my dresser next to a picture of Dad and me at Great American Ballpark. Sometimes when I'm having a hard day, I hold it and remember that there are still heroes in the world. When Pete Rose read that letter, he cried for the first time in years. Not tears of sadness or regret, but tears of gratitude for a little boy who had reminded him that redemption doesn't always come from clearing your name or changing the past. Sometimes it comes from choosing to be better in the present and using your influence to lift others up. The conversation about Pete Rose's reinstatement to baseball continued, but for Pete himself, it no longer seemed like the most important thing. He had found something more valuable than a place in the Hall of Fame. He had found a way to be the kind of man that Tommy Mitchell could continue to call his hero. Years later, when sports historians looked back on Pete Rose's complex legacy, they would note that his 256 hits made him the all-time leader in baseball history. But many would argue that his greatest hit was the one that didn't show up in any record book. The moment he chose to kneel down in a parking lot and listen to a young boy's dreams, setting in motion a chain of events that reminded an entire nation why we need heroes in the first place. The story of Pete Rose and Tommy Mitchell became more than just a feel-good sports story. It became a reminder that everyone has the power to change someone's life, that kindness is never wasted, and that true heroism is measured not by our achievements, but by our willingness to lift others up when they need it most. In the end, Pete Rose's greatest legacy might not be his hits or his hustle or even his mistakes. It might be a lesson learned from a 9-year-old boy who taught a fallen hero that redemption is always possible, one act of kindness at a time.